ask our viewers to exercise discretion while watching families in Afghanistan face anguished solitary struggle to free children taken for the pervasive practice of bacha, or pedophilic exploitation, by Western-backed security forces, victims of a hidden epidemic of kidnappings of young boys for institutionalized sexual slavery. Here's a report.
Struggling to rescue a young family member. Shireen's 13-year-old brother-in-law was kidnapped last summer. He's been a police commander's sex slave ever since.
If they were going to educate him in the police academy, it would have been great. But they are too young to fight. They are taking the boys only to have sex with them.
Shireen's story is far from an isolated one. In southern Helmand province, many families are scared their sons will become police sex slaves. It's a local practice known as bacha, meaning literally boy play.
Police forces would knock on our door at midnight and ask for my little uncle. They would torture my grandfather. Finally, my uncle had to leave his school and escape from the village.
Families worry the captive boys will develop drug habits and get used to a culture of abuse. Freeing them, though, is complicated.
When they take a boy, then it is really difficult to find him. They keep taking him around and changing the place of the boy.
While the international community has called for an end to bacha, Afghan authorities deny there is a problem at all.
The president even sent out very high delegations, high-level delegations, and they went and checked all our, where we are, the police, the ANA, and also all the CPs of the different forces here. And they didn't find a single, sample or example of these guys' presence there.
Shireen is hoping for someone to help him and other families get their boys back and one day bring their captors to justice. Bureau Report, WION.
In an ironic fallout on the crackdown against the Taliban, the group is now using these sex slaves itself in an attempt to mount crippling insider attacks on police in southern Afghanistan. These young boys are now becoming vulnerable to Taliban's propaganda. More details in this report.
Once a policeman, now a tailor. 21-year-old Matiullah is the only survivor from a Taliban insider attack that killed 7 people at a police checkpoint in the southern Afghan province of Uruzgan. The attacker was not a hardened insurgent, but his commanding officer's boy sex slave, or bacha.
A lot of police commanders in Uruzgan refuse to go to checkpoints for duty if there are no bachas for entertainment. Bachas have also resulted in a deadly rivalry between commanders.
Security officials say the Taliban are exploiting the local practice called bacha to mount these kind of attacks.
The boys are used for sexual purposes as women, and the Taliban are using this weak point against the police.
This is a big problem in police forces. That's why reform is needed.
Such attacks have killed hundreds of policemen here in the last 2 years. According to officials, bacha is common at most police checkpoints in Uruzgan province, fueling insecurity and prompting calls for change.
It is a big concern for us. These bacha attacks have fueled deep mistrust within police ranks.
Now our commanders don't allow the boys. We had one here, but they kicked him out.
The Taliban deny using underage boys for insider attacks. Survivors like Matiullah know better than anyone that reform is needed to bring an end to the abuse and, in turn, the killing. Bureau Report, WION.
Joining me on this show to talk more about this pervasive issue in Afghanistan, I have Agha Muhammad Qureshi, an Afghan Youth Parliament Speaker from Kabul. Also with me is Mr. Zabiullah Noori, Deputy Director of the Afghanistan Journalists Centre, joining in from London is AP's Kabul Bureau Chief Lynn O'Donnell. Let me first ask you, Mr. Qureshi, can you tell us how serious and how deep is the issue that we are discussing here in Afghanistan?
Afghanistan is the most religious country in the world, and this is a sacred shame and a big concern for young children and youth in Afghanistan that the bacha and playboy is increasing day by day. One thing which is very clear, the bacha is a big concern since the time of the Soviet invasion. The time when the Afghan Mujahideen were fighting against the Russian forces. In these times, the government was not able to control all the areas of Afghanistan. Since that time, still in Afghanistan, in many areas, in the areas where the government is not having control, in some areas where there are the warlords, they are doing bacha or playboy.
Mr. Noori, it's one of the worst kept secrets of Afghan society. References in books, movies, but still a taboo topic. Do you think secrecy is the biggest hurdle in addressing the problem?
Thank you for having me on the show. Yes, of course it is. Unfortunately, the Afghan media covers these things, but the Afghan authorities do not cooperate with the local journalists as much as they do with internationals, or the Afghan journalists do not have the resources to go into these because they don't have the resources. But some of the foreign journalists with the well connections that they have on top of the government, they will get access to these facts much more better than the local journalists. But we can't deny this bad phenomena does exist, and as the Honorable MP mentioned, it's common mostly among the warlords and the people who are influential, who have power, money, and no one can touch them.
Mr. Qureshi, would you have an understanding of how the various regimes in Afghanistan have tried to address this issue, if at all?
Sure, this is a big problem, and mostly the government's trying to hinder these issues among the police, among the ANA, and in some parts of Afghanistan, but the government still is not able to do so. The problem is due to insecurity in some parts of Afghanistan, and another bigger problem is poor economic situation of children and youth in Afghanistan. You know, according to the demographic studies of Afghanistan, most of the generation is young, and mostly young children who are in some parts indulged and suffered with such bigger insecurity. So the Afghan, in Afghan community, the Afghan government still is not able to hinder these issues in some parts of Afghanistan, mostly in the areas where the government is not having full control. So in this case, the Afghanistan's youth parliament, civil societies and media can play a good role. And mostly we are fighting against this bad phenomenon in our society.
Sure. Mr. Qureshi, we also have this extremely complex case of exploited children becoming vulnerable to the Taliban propaganda and in fact becoming militants themselves. How can one deal with a complex situation like this?
You know, the problem of militants and terrorism is not only relating to the Afghan community, and this is a regional problem, and even it is an international problem. Unfortunately, in our region, many madrasas, mostly to the other side of the border, in Pakistan, Pakistani areas, mostly in Fatah, in some other areas, madrasas are not producing religious scholars and religious Taliban. but they are producing militants, and mostly they are recruiting children and young boys to be working as slaves for fight in suicide attacks. You see many examples and instances in Afghanistan. They are coming from that side of the border. You see these examples in India even, and most parts of the region are insecure, and this is a bigger problem. It's not only in Afghanistan. It is a regional problem. The members of SARC should fight against this serious issue.
Mr. Qureshi, you're absolutely right. I was in Razmak in South Waziristan, and I was taken to one such facility by the Pakistani soldiers themselves. And that facility was to train young suicide bombers between the ages of 12 to 15. Now, these suicide bombers under the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan were being trained to go bomb facilities. Most of these children were given drugs at the last minute before they went to explode the vest that they were wearing, and if they didn't do it themselves, and the Taliban would do it. And the Pakistani soldiers explained to me how a lot of these kids fall victims to it. They usually come from very poor families. The families give it to these organizations, madrasas, and then they are used, obviously, they are abused, and then beyond that, they are made to commit suicide, literally, and these are the suicide bombers. Lynn McDonald joins me from London. She spent years in Afghanistan. Lynn, the Taliban on one end, the exploitative Afghanistan security forces establishment on the other. Where do we see the moral standpoint here? Lynn, can you hear me? I was asking, we see on one end. All right, Mr. Qureshi, let me come back to you there. Lynn will join us shortly once we have our audio in. But looking at the whole spectrum there, you know, Taliban on one side, the Afghan security forces on the other, or other religious groups that are also involved in abusing these children. Where is the moral standpoint? Like, how do these people go back to sleep every single day? I can't believe it.
Two things are very clear. The Taliban regime in the time when they were ruling Afghanistan, most parts of Afghanistan, and the current government of Afghanistan, they both are against bacha and playboy. But unfortunately, Taliban, mostly TTP, Pakistani Taliban, are using young children and boys for suicide attacks and many other purposes. Another issue, which is mostly present in some documentaries relating to Afghanistan's bacha is they are calling this a cultural issue, but I'm opposing this idea due to this. In Afghanistan, bacha is not a tradition, it is not a culture. Some warlords in some parts of Afghanistan, they are doing this issue against the law. In Islamic Sharia, as well as in Afghanistan's criminal law, these issues are strongly abandoned, and they are controversially opposing these issues. So in Afghanistan, this is not issue, nor it is a cultural issue, but in some parts where the warlords are doing this, they are doing by force. The public opinion is strongly opposing this bad issue in secret shape.
Absolutely. The religion prohibits any such contact, and it's punishable by death. I understand that. Do we have Lynn on the line with us now? Okay, we don't. Let me come back to you, Mr. Qureshi, again. What is the answer? How do we move forward? What can be done on a social level, and what can be done on a government level to clamp down on this?
There are two responsibilities for us. One is a regional and international responsibility for us, which is not only the responsibility of the Afghan government and the Afghanistan's nation. This is the responsibility of the countries of the region, mostly the international responsibility, to fight against the terrorism, to fight against the militants, and to fight against the terrorist issues which are continuous in the region, mostly harming Afghanistan and some other countries, where the children are involved in madrasas and they are used and abused for terror purposes, mostly for the suicide attacks. The second responsibility is on the shoulders of the Afghan government and the Afghan nation, which is the issue of bacha, which is day by day increasing since the time of the Soviet invasion in Afghanistan. This is the responsibility of the Afghan government to fight this issue strongly among the police forces and to catch those warlords who are doing these issues, and mostly in the parts where the government is controlling. The second responsibility is of the Afghanistan civil societies, media, and tribal and religious elders. And the mullahs and the religious elders who are working as religious elders in masjids and madrasas in Afghanistan, they should fight against this very big concern, which is against the youth and young children in Afghanistan. Surely, previously I have mentioned that the Afghanistan's public opinion is not allowing these issues. It is strongly opposing bacha and playboy.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us on this show tonight. This is something that we as a human race need to be ashamed of, whether it happens in Afghanistan, Pakistan, or wherever else. If you feel strongly about it, use our social media handles or WION News and tweet about it, write on Facebook about it, come to our website and continue taking this conversation forward. I don't think humanity can exist in a form like this. We're going to wrap up Gravitas on that note. News and updates from South Asia and the world continue on the other side of the break. Thanks for watching. Good night and good luck.